Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. A warm welcome to you to this Shared Services Forum's Leadership Roundtable interaction. My name is Rakesh Sinha. I'm the co-founder for the Shared Services Forum, and of course, very excited and privileged to be here today amongst all of you. We have just gone live, and I think the people sitting here warmly welcoming each one of you who have come in person, taking a lot of effort and time to be here. I know these days the traffic is the talk of the town for any city. I think Chennai seems to be slightly better, but with the kind of a rain outside or drizzle outside, we still understand there are few of the thought leaders are yet to be here in the room. I warmly welcome each one of you who have joined live on the social media platforms like LinkedIn, YouTube, and all those who will be watching this later on the Shared Services Forum portal, this recorded interaction. So warm welcome to each one of you. As we start with the proceedings, I think I just wanted to share with you, and many of you would be aware, what is Shared Services Forum all about. I think this forum all started with I have been sharing this interesting story during the tea and coffee break with few of you. It started with a lot of passion and vengeance, if I can say. So about good 11, 12 years back, there was not much of a platform or industry association which was bringing the people across the world of what we call business and business processes together, and ensuring that they learn from each other. Because as we say, the business needs to understand business processes, and the same point of time, the business process world leaders needs to understand it is just not about processes, but business as well, because it's all about business processes. So that connect is very, very critical. We started before many marquee platforms in India brought something called GIC forum, GCC forums, etc. And what about the vengeance? I was part of one of the events overseas because that was the only platform which was hosting some of the events like this. And it used to have a lot of cost for the leaders to travel and be there, and only one of the leaders of the center will travel. And typically, some of the big boys of the GIC, today called GIC, that time maybe Shared Services World, will travel and spend some time, learn from each other, and so on and so forth. One of the major best practices benchmarking organization leader was presenting there something called benchmarks and best practices, and I, out of curiosity, happened to ask a question by saying, when you say it's a best practices and benchmark, how many leaders from India have pulled into it? And the answer was none. And I'm talking about 2010, and I think, we felt a little bad about it because, and nothing about being, nationalist. I wanted to clarify it's about, this land now provides about 57% of ITS exports. And the kind of knowledge and the practices here is something which we keep innovating and inventing and so on and so forth. So the idea was that the thought process and some of the inputs of the leaders in India should also be part of when we call benchmarks or best practices. With that, I came back and I, till date, keep on saying that despite it's been 11 years, that we are not an event company, and I'm still learning how to run events. We are good to bring leaders like you together to share some of the knowledge, best practices, etc. And also not just create and be a repository of best practices and benchmark, but also create something new back for the industry, something innovative. And I think in the last 11 years, we never thought we'll sustain for 11 years. And I know a lot of event organizations are coming in and talking about shared services, et cetera, et cetera. I think we continue to have a focus in terms of looking at how to ensure there's a knowledge dissemination. And knowledge dissemination is just not about events. It could be multiple ways. It could be through knowledge articles. So we have a quarterly journals where people can share their learnings their success stories. And I always encourage, and sometimes very difficult to make that point, that it's not always about success stories, sometimes even failures, because you learn very fast from others' failures. Hopefully so. So it is important to bring that perspective as well in front and not just leaving to the success stories. The second thing we, from a forum point of view, focus a lot on is research and creating something new, intellectual property. We have done 20 plus path-breaking frameworks, which brought in a lot of perspective across the industry leaders, which is also being very well embraced and used by some of the organizations. Besides the research and creating those innovative frameworks, we also have a very strong focus. Actually, we realize that there's a lot of recognition happens for the corporates. Right? If it's a pharma company, you will find them part of a pharma association and the business leader receiving a lot of awards. I know now a lot of awards are happening and awards evening are happening, and I'm not talking about last 4 or 5 years. I'm taking you back about 11 years back when we started. There was none who was focused on encouraging a business services world or a shared services world. And that is where we started by saying, we need to recognize the kind of contribution the business services or the shared services team is delivering. Right? There's a lot of heavy lifting is done in terms of the entire growth journey of the organization and so on and so forth. With that, we had this Excellence Awards and recognition, and we have a separate jury panel, so I have no role, or Ravi has no role to play in what and who is the winner, and it's for the corporate as well as for the leaders. So we have recognized some of the pioneering leaders who have set the ball rolling of this industry in different forms and avatars, as well as some of the leaders, as we call BPM achievers, who are still in the industry and contributing, and they have been recognized in the recent past. This is quickly about what we do as a shared services forum, and interestingly, we have a small video to play which talks about the journey of shared services forum about last 10 years. But before I move to the shared services forums, this video, I also wanted to share that the kind of leaders we have in the room, each one of you bring the kind of an experience which is very diverse. Be it from the business services world, we have leaders not from the business services world and from a typical corporate space or advisory space, providing diverse views, and very happy to have that. It's difficult, let me tell you, I'm nervous because each one of you are going to have a different perspectives to share. At the same point of time, very excited and super excited because each one of you are going to contribute a very different kind of a perspective, and that is important for us. We don't want to converge and say this is what is right for you. We don't want to be prescriptive, but certainly we want to bring out those perspectives for each one of you. So pretty much like I don't mind saying more than 500 years of experience pretty much sitting on this in this V-shaped table, and another maybe 500 years of experience in front of me. So 1,000 years of experience in this hall today, and I feel very elated and very happy with that. I welcome each of the panelists here who will be sharing their experience. And interestingly, all your profiles have been put on the portal and has been shared with the people who have logged in live right now, or who will be seeing even in the recorded portal. They'll be able to read your profiles because it's available on the portal. And the people who are here in the hall, you can just read this program book. So instead of reading out each profiles, pretty much available the entire detail in the program book. With this, I'll take a pause for a few minutes because I'd be very excited to share with you the journey of Shared Services Forum for the last 10 years, and I'll move to that, and then I'll come back to the conversation. Can we have the AV, please? Thank you, each one of you, to patiently looking at this audio visual. And I think it was quite nostalgic for us to reflect back about 10 years of our journey, and now 11 years in a way. I think where we started, I think it was very much focused on what we call shared services. We went into functions like finance, and then HR, and then procurement, and then digital. And the industry was also building up, right? So through the years like 2011 to 2015 was one kind of a period. And then 2016 to 19 was another kind of a period. And then 19 to 2021 was another kind, where we all of a sudden came back to this virtual environment, and we were talking this entire virtual stuff and still trying to pick the industry together. And then, of course, pretty much last 1 year and so on and so forth. A couple of areas where I just wanted to build, and I think I'll connect back to the conversation which you want to have is, we learned during this period it is about collaboration, contribution, and seeing how we can make things more rich in terms of the frameworks, etc., etc. We had some great leaders participating and sharing their perspective and learning from the forum. And I'm sure we will continue the journey thanks to support from each one of you. Great. So let's move to the agenda for the today. And I think we are all just waiting to hear the perspective from each one of you. What we want to really talk and deliberate today. I think we all know the last few years have taught us how fragile we are, right? I mean, we went through difficult situations, disorder, shock, turbulence, whatever you want to name it. I think we all had that kind of interesting experience. And very recently, I was talking in one of the forums, and I was talking about that how many of you have really enjoyed the turbulence. And when it comes to conceptually, we all say, yes, great. Then I asked a question that how many of you have really enjoyed the turbulence mid-air in an aircraft? And people say exploit the turbulence, right? And how many of you really, if you can show by hands, tell me, you have said, wow, we are in turbulence, let's enjoy it, let's exploit it, let's find what we can do different, right? Anybody? Right. So when the turbulence comes in the mid-air, right, you start stepping back, I mean, I don't mind and I don't shy away from saying that we start talking about, is baar bacha lo, agle baar dekh lenge, right? You start getting into that kind of, mindset. So that's what happens to even your corporate world. While a lot has been talked about how you can be resilient and so on and so forth, but that's the kind of a disorder when it comes, we look at. And pandemic is past us, so I'm not going to talk about pandemic. And the entire dialogue today, and I will request my colleagues here, and I will, of course, engage each one of you here as well, because you bring your own thought leadership and perspective. So the idea is to have multiple perspectives. Let's have the dialogue more from the organization point of view, and not limiting it only from the, what I call as either a shared services or a function point of view. Second, organization or a business connecting with corporate functions, because finally many of the business services back or deliver services to those corporate functions, those corporate function being as finance, HR, IT, whatever it may be, that finally connects back to the business. So if you can think from that and put our perspective and not just ring fence to the shared services, I think will be helpful to hear some of the thoughts. I think one of the areas lot has been talked about is being resilience, being a resilient leader, being a resilient organization, and so on and so forth, which is good. Actually, there's an analogy which talks about by saying, if you're a fragile, you are like a glass and you will break. If you're resilient, you are like a rubber, so you will bounce back. So you'll still have challenges, but you'll be able to face it. Now the world is all about moving from resilience to the what we call anti-fragility. And this is a term which was referred by Taleb in a book in 2008. And now it's all about anti-fragility by saying, how you just not sustain that disorder, but you also thrive during that. You find more winning combination to come out of it. And that's why our today's topic, which is about moving beyond, and we're talking about nurturing the innovation quotient. So innovation is pretty much a need of the hour for each organization. We intentionally brought this term IQ or innovation quotient to say how much you really, because quotient by design means there has to be some numbers, there has to be some measurement. How you measure that? How you look at my saying, my innovation quotient is A, B, C, D, or 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever it may be. How do you look at that? And that is something which you want to build further on the dialogue, and also connecting with some of the, pointers below that, like looking at things like how you look at next practices, etc., etc. So building this dialogue, I will request maybe Geetha, you would like to pick the thoughts first to talk about. I think one of the areas where we are all talking about, if you're talking, the two words which comes in our mind is, which we want to stress more, is moving beyond. So it is not that something which we are not doing. So it's about finding that beyond. And second is this whole nurturing the innovation quotient. So innovation has been again a term which has been very so often used that it has sometimes also feels that we have lost the value and the meaning of it. You'll find innovation hub, innovation center, innovation this, etc., etc. So how do we look at innovation in a context of a corporate functions? And if I have to build some pointers in terms of connecting from what I always call about, it's just not about transformation. Again, the transformation is another word, if I can say. It has lost a little bit of its meaning and value because so much has been used. Same point of time, the requirement is now moved towards metamorphosis, as we call it. And as we all know, transformation is unidimensional, while metamorphosis is multidimensional. It's a multiple simultaneous transformations cutting across the areas and functions and not focusing on only one area and so on and so forth. So some thoughts in terms of, because you do a lot of digital stuff, so maybe not so much of digital, but connecting this dot with innovation and with something on this transformation and metamorphosis will be good starting comments from you, Geetha, and then maybe I'll request others to catch.
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me? Yeah. No, great context setting, Rakesh. And yeah, when you talk about transformation, I think from my experience that, I've seen in the past, it's not just about, standing up and saying we change the technology and you adopt, this new technology. It all starts with really understanding, why should I do that? Why do I need to change? What's in it there for me? So it's really, when you talk about it's really about understanding at the core, why do you need to transform something? What's in it there? And you start to really build the use cases in terms of demonstrating, what are the benefits. And once you start to build those use cases and show people how it's transforming a function or how it's transforming a business and adding value, that's when you really start to, touch the nerve of people that you're trying to really address. From my experience, it often doesn't come on its own. It's a lot of change management, and it's about really connecting with people, working through the ranks, explaining to them, why we need to move ahead in terms of, how we are doing our business or really dealing with the function. And in some ways, it means going back to the drawing board and rethinking processes. There's always resistance to change, and while people say, change is the only constant, I think there's always a resistance to change as long as things are working fine. But that's where I think, from my experience, what I've seen is, okay, today you're seeing, a benefit of X. Then when you do this, you see a benefit of, X times 2x, or 2.5x. And you build those use cases, take those opportunities, fail fast, learn, and build those use cases. I think that's when you start to, really connect with the ranks and file, and people resonate with what you're trying to say. To that extent, organizations have to invest to some extent to build that initial sort of, proof of concepts and test that. Because the client will not necessarily pay for every such, use case. You've got to start with something that the organization believes will have a transformative impact. And then when you start showing to, your various teams, whether it's business or functions, how it's going to make their jobs easier, how it's actually going to, free up their time to do high value added work, that's when, people start to join. And then they say, okay, I really want to understand how this works. And then let's form a, team and let's work together. So that's what I think works. It's about winning hearts and minds. It's about showing the value, and it's really, transforming the mindset.
Right. No, I think it's an interesting perspective, Geetha, and thanks for sharing that. I think maybe it will be helpful to hear from you from GV if you want to add something more to it and connect. I think the context also has changed when you're looking at some of these metamorphoses. Also, the entire operating models for some of the organizations have changed, and how you are connecting that operating model back with the innovation quotient, and what kind of a structure which you're trying to have in the place to drive this metamorphosis. A quick thought from you will be helpful.
Sure. I mean, to start with, good evening to everybody, and thanks for arranging this roundtable in Chennai. It has been quite a while that you guys have not visited Chennai, and maybe you're expecting the next the GBS conference to be happening in Chennai as well, right?
Sure, we'll do that.
So you're very right when you said when you look at best practices versus practices which are relative to a context. Because you just can't apply best practice everywhere and say it is going to work, right? And the operating model change is something that, what I would like to share is in the entire hybrid model of working. That's relative to a context of what we have got into, post the pandemic. This wasn't there earlier. If you look back in 2019 and prior, nobody would have thought about at least business services in terms of, working from home. It was never there, and you'll have to come to office, you have to be at the place of work, right? But again, things changed, and you had to have that metamorphosis happening, right? And you have to get into an operating model. Today, it has opened up a lot of things. Today, it's kind of gone the other direction, let's say 360 degrees, where, people say, why not working from home? Why do you want me to come to office every day? There's a perfect work-life balance. Of course, you have a flexibility, right? Today, if you want to have 2 days or 3 days, right? Somebody says, no, I want to work all the 5 days. Yes, it depends upon the operating model that you're typically going with. The biggest advantage that it has brought in is, let's say that you don't have your center spread across within a country, right? But then where were you getting your talent from? You are always narrowed down to the place where you have your center. We have a center in Chennai. Like few of you might have a center in 2-3 places. Okay, you can then scout for the skill set. But if you are uni-centered, right, then typically what really happens? This model has really helped us. It was brought in with, this model came in because of a certain context change which happened post-pandemic, but it has opened up a lot of things. Today, any of us can go and recruit people from anywhere within India. And you're not really, limited with skill set or talent, right? And if you have your stakeholder other side saying, I need this talent, access to talent is really, it just widened a lot. I think that's the biggest change if I see it in terms of an operating model and what it has helped with. And because of this, the entire penetration to digital. We are talking about digital, but now without digital, you can't really work on a lot of things. It's a beaten down word, no doubt, but in a very different way that you are seeing this. More again, context.
Right. No, I think some great points you talked about in terms of the operating model and in your case how it has worked. So I'll come back and talk about that. So just holding that point back. But I would like to hear maybe from here, Hema, if you want to add something more to it in terms of this whole the question of looking at very functional focused transformation versus looking at cross-functional metamorphosis and linking it together finally back to the corporate and not just the business services. Any experiences which you'd like to share in terms of how have the organizations in any of the context from you gone through some structure of this metamorphosis? So any experiences from you?
So, thank you for inviting me to this forum. So just wanted to share our perspective. If we kind of take the transformation journey, it used to work in silos, right? So these are some things that I have on my plate and these are some things that I can offer. Right now, those things have completely changed. So it is no more what I have, you take it. It is more in terms of understanding from the customers what they really want. I mean, I've seen over the last 2 years, we ask the customers, okay, tell us what is your problem statement. For example, we did one of the studies in our digital area where we kind of analyzed the CSAT. I'm taking the simplest of examples. So what really was there in that CSAT, right? So what were the concerns that we had? So we went back to the customers and we said that what is that you want to analyze? Is it really about understanding what is satisfied, what is dissatisfied, and how many people are not happy about X, Y, Z? Or are we kind of looking at a completely different change journey that people want to go through? So examples like those have really transformed. It's no more about, okay, I have a standard report, I've created this in the past X number of years ago and I'm going to offer that to you. It's now about, I don't care what that is. Customers, you tell us what we want. Business, you tell us what you want. For example, within GBS organization, we would want to kind of look at it in a very different way. If you take our business, they want to look at the whole thing in a very, very different way. So it is about customizing the requirement, first understanding, customizing the requirement, and then producing the result. I think that's where the journey has evolved a lot over the last 2 years. It's no more one size fits all. It doesn't work.
Okay. Then I think it's a fair point by saying it's not about what has worked for an organization A will work for an organization B. But I think what I hear from you is that, and I think from others as well, that I think at least that silos is not something which is going to make it work. So now, of course, you are trying to break it from that silos to make it across the function. Maybe Ravi, you want to add something to this whole point of metamorphosis, because I know it's something very close to you.
Yeah, sure. And I think as the inputs start coming from some of the thought leaders, I think I wanted to kind of share 2-3 key perspectives. First one I feel is, when we talk about innovation quotient, I think it's important for us to contextualize it for each organization, because, as Rakesh, you put it, a quotient must have a number, Now, how do I start with a number? I'm just telling you. So if I were to look at it, and that's what I've been trying to see, I would say there are multiple, touch points or pressure points in an organization. Each organization will have some touch point which will actually make the innovation kick off. It could be people, it could be processes, it could be transformation, it could be benchmarking. I've seen, for instance, the whole industry shared services started because, American Express started benchmarking the cost of finance function as a percentage to revenue, And now, today it's crossed all its boundaries. But somebody said, should I need to have so much percentage of cost of my revenue in finance function, So benchmarking sometimes triggers, what we call the innovation. Or, you really talk about and in today's context, not just our own capabilities, but the startup system outside, the external ecosystem. So there are multiple touch points. And I really feel each organization has to look at, and that's what I have kind of interacted with multiple organizations, small or big, it's just one kind of story. But I do believe there's a huge opportunity for the organization to reflect and see where can I start my innovation, It's not always, that's why I really feel that, innovation is not is something which is just a property of what business services should be doing. Actually, I think innovation in the way I come from manufacturing when I started my career, and innovation in production was given. I don't think, anyone needs to talk about production innovation, because if you don't, then you will have a challenge. Next one was innovate for marketing, because that's how, Hindustan Lever and all said, how do I look at distribution and how do I make cost of distribution the lowest? What I mean to say is, to the point which you brought, innovation quotient is not about business services. It's about business. Having said that, and I really wanted to add this important point, why is it becoming so important for the business services industry to focus on innovation quotient from a business context? My personal experience has been there are only 2 things in an organization, business and business processes. You need to innovate both always. And business processes has 2 big dimensions. You have a process and technology. And today I must say, technology is 10 times faster, but processes are 10 times behind. So we really have a challenge. When we talk of innovation, production innovates, but we find processes really limit that innovation. So I think one of the important things I feel is the industry leaders from the business services should go beyond these business processes to look at business. If I talk of plantations, where GV comes from, I think it's a huge space of supply chain, looking at production in multiple locations, weather and weather conditions, Now, those things, how do I really make sure I'm anti-fragile, to the point you talked about? So I think today, but if I'm going to do just a processing and doing a good supply chain, I think it's not going to be sufficient. I was sharing with some of the audience there, just to finish this point, and I'll let more people to share this. To me, I truly believe manufacturing, all of us should understand manufacturing. Yeah, I may not have to do manufacturing, but I think manufacturing is core to the way you can think differently, And all types of models, whether you talk about outsourcing, subcontracting, operating models, have come out of manufacturing. They're not just, but unfortunately today business services industry thinks I want to build 500,000 people organization, 200,000 people organization. To me, that's not going to be innovative. One has to see innovations to happen at the right place. So if I have to really summarize my thought, I think it has to start at the touch point where the innovation can actually start for each organization differently. Business services organizations have a duty, because if they are going to take care of business processes, they need to have focus on business and innovation. Either you nurture the innovation of the business or add to the innovation of the business. That's the second one. And last but not the least, the point we touched about transformation and metamorphosis. I think today there is no one transformation. I think Hema talked about it very well. It is not one. Today, at least after COVID, it is true. But even before COVID, when we talked about in SSF, we talked about digital metamorphosis in 2017. Digital transformation is not one transformation. Digital transformation is data transformation, process transformation, customer experience transformation, and then you talk of business model transformation. So there is so many transformations which are interwoven and sometimes happening simultaneously. I think there is a necessity for us to see how we can, I'm just, leaving the thought, not just change gears, but we need to change vehicles today, We just can't say, I'm going to go from third gear to fourth gear to fifth gear and so on. That is still you will be on the land. Can you really make sure how do you change vehicles for innovation? And disrupt is usual. BAU is now DAU, as we talked about. And disruption engineering, I grew with something called financial engineering many years back, but today we have to have a disruption engineering for innovation quotient. I just want to throw some of the perspectives, but I really wanted to give it back to the audience to pick it up.
No, thanks, Ravi, and I think very well summarized some of the points, and I think specifically in the couple of areas learning from manufacturing is very, very critical. I think the entire concept of outsourcing, offshoring, components, etc., has come out from that manufacturing, and I think that connect is very important. I think the second one, which is coming out as a overall few themes, if I can start summarizing and then move to the next areas of conversation. I think one is, it's all about the term which we use very actively at our organization is what we say BIC to BIC. It is best in class to best in context. I think you're talking about contextualizing it. I think that is something which is very, very important. And hence, the innovation quotient will be different for each of the organization. I think another one is the trigger for the innovation, and it could be a very different trigger. Some can look at from the cost point of view, some can look at from the operating model, the talent, and so on and so forth. But one thing which is very important, I think, and it came out, and I think is, which in the beginning also I was talking about, is business and business processes. Both needs to connect and innovate is very, very critical. And I think another specific point which is coming out here is we have to change the entire mindset of by saying, let me move from a speed A to speed B. The term actually we use quite a lot these days is about, you have to proactively, as Ravi was talking about financial re-engineering. Actually, sometimes I say first you engineer, then re-engineer. Are you even engineering it? So proactively engineer some of your processes. So that the term which we use is called disruptional engineering. So you first engineer those disruption, and that's why the term which we use, or we coined a term, and I gave it by saying, like you have a business as usual, BAU, you need to have something called DAU if you really want to sustain. And DAU is disruption as usual. So it has to be something which is ingrained into your system, and it should not be dependent on external. And that is where the connect to the innovation happens. So I think the DAU is an important point. So engineering and DAU, I would like to put it here. Now, building the conversation further, and I would like to hear maybe from you, Shalini, if you want to add some thoughts to it by saying, the overall organizations, and you have seen some of the organizations which has spend a lot of time to first even understand where they are, like typically what we call current state, and then diving into to say, this is my baselines. There were challenges even to appreciate the baselines, right? Sometimes I've seen, I don't know what has been the experience of some of the folks here, is that they will say, I want to be best in class without even knowing where they are, right? So that's the first question to be solved for by saying where you are first you need to understand, right? And then you can do whatever you want to do. Everybody talks about GBS 4.0, I don't know, very soon somebody will say GBS 9.0 and all the stuff. But what is that, right? Or how are we connected? So looking at the current baseline of the organization, and not just baseline from the process metrics point of view, but even in terms of looking at the process maturity or even the digital quotient, etc., and then connecting back to the benchmark. Because one is, of course, you're looking inside with the baseline, but then you have to also exactly look for the benchmark. How do you see that, and any experience which you would like to share from that perspective?
Sure. Thanks, Rakesh, and pleasure to be here today. I was, just before I answer your question or get to it, is your 10-year journey had some interesting milestones. You spoke of unlocking strategic value in 2016. We're still talking about it today. You spoke of digital metamorphosis in 2017. We are at another level of it. In 2018, you spoke of redefining HR for tomorrow. I don't think one would have imagined where we are today and what we are trying to redefine on HR. So it's fascinating because your 10 years took us back to where the industry has, what the industry has been through. What started off in the old days as ITES, the IT-enabled services industry, giving birth to BPO. Today we don't use that term anymore. And then evolved to shared services, GICs, GCCs. And where I'm leading to with this is, in my view, I think GCCs needs to be also a term of tomorrow, because the whole concept of a center has some very some connotations with what it means. It immediately makes you picture head office, the organization, there's a center, which I think is changing and has already changed. The one big change we've seen over the last 3 years, and I think COVID drove that innovation. So lots of dots to connect, some great conversations. If you look at, whether it's the business or what the customer wants that's driving the change, our world changed because of what we were driven to. What we as employees, as organizations were forced to, and that innovation is at another level. So when I look at where this whole GCC model is going to go, those global lines have already blurred. What are we? We are a very significant node in a network, if you may call it that. And I think increasingly becoming a nerve center of sorts, because with what technology is driving, I think the future is, to your point on moving beyond, it's about really how are we, in some sense, digitally cloning the organization out of India. And some are already there, the others aspire to get there. So the one point and coming to your question, I think what I've not heard get talked about, but which is a big part of it, is the way data is pulling it all together. I think data is the one if I may call it, the lowest common denominator that stitches the organization together. Honestly, sometimes we innovate for the sake of innovating, and over the years accumulate all kinds of tools and systems on the back of that innovation. And now we are trying to innovate to simplify. So I liked your point to say first engineer, then re-engineer, because we've really created over the years a spectrum of systems which we're now trying to simplify. Most organizations have done it without deliberation. To Ravi's point earlier, the technologies have moved ahead, but processes haven't kept pace. There's been a proliferation of technologies as a need to simplify. But if we come back to data at the base, it then connects beautifully the entire business model. I think across the business value chain, whether it is how you can impact the customer, how you can impact your employees, if you look at that data that flows across the value chain and innovate leveraging that, I think it's a fantastic way to do it. Finally, and maybe a long-winded response to your question, and again, I like the concept of BIC to BIC, because I think benchmarks to an extent are a bit overrated.
Yeah.
Oh, that was a very quick agreement, an emphatic one.
They don't consider the capabilities of the organization at all.
They don't consider maturity of the organization. I mean, can you really compare one organization to another? You can't. But can you compare how mature are you in managing your data structures, the way you're pulling that together? Do you really have that one version of the truth? Those are more simplistic benchmarks you can aspire to get. I don't think beyond that one should really get too hassled with benchmarks, each one to where you are in your journey and how you're going to simplify and drive efficiency. And hence, I think the benchmarking bit is a bit, and I say that as a consultant, but it is, I genuinely believe, overrated. I think the context, one organization to another, is way more important. So, yeah, those just a few thoughts. Rakesh, sorry, I was connecting a few other conversations along the way.
Nothing very helpful.
Thank
and
you.
I just wanted to share a couple of interesting points. I think one, an opportunity for me to make a point. Every time I do that, I think sometimes that company believes into paying some royalty back to me. We actually wrote a book, and I was part of writing a book in 2012. It was inflection point. We actually identified or coined some term like global India. We said, India is not just India, it's a global, as you were talking about, or digital cloning, etc. So in 2012, I authored a book along with my colleague Sanjay Gupta, and we talked about, BPM in global India. And we coined this term BPM at that time, and even today sometimes BPM is an interchangeably used with a typical workflow system. We coined this BPM as a term which was business process management, and multiple other components below that. An entire book was about that. And we said it's an inflection point for the competitive advantage. Talking about BPC, BPT, BPS, BPSS, skill systems, and so on and so forth. So multiple components, we brought it under the BPM. And in 2013 towards end or early 14, Infosys BPO changed their name to Infosys BPM. So I still look forward to the royalty from them. The second one is... called BPM, exactly. I know, and I was avoiding that because I think from a platform point of view, it's a little sensitive. I have a lot of friends in Infosys, so I can pull some, dig on that, right? So the second one, I think you talked about ITES. I think it's a very interesting one, IT-enabled services, and still 20 years back we used to talk about ITES, and still you'll find a lot of research reports using the term IT and ITES. And you'll not believe it, the same way like you picked some of the words from the milestone point of view. In 2017, we actually created a framework from a shared services forum perspective called TIBS. And actually now we are uplifting it further to say AIBS. So TIBS is basically tech integrated business services. You can't remain IT enabled. You have to be tech integrated. And now we are talking about artificial intelligence integrated business services, because that's something which you have to step it up to the next level, and so on and so forth. So another point which you talked about, and I think it takes me to, maybe I'll hear from Bhaskar, and maybe I'll go back to you, Suresh, for that comment, and maybe Venkat. So three of you can just build on this thought. This whole point of, again, going back to this the baselining to benchmark, and even and two topics we talked about, and we are trying to connect this to the transformation and metamorphosis. This term which Shalini used now, the single source of truth, right? And I can tell you two examples, and maybe all of you may have a different experience, but I don't know, maybe some of you would like to add to it. Is, we talk about so much of technology, digital, etc., etc. Being part of some of the work which we do as a transformation ourselves, and I have done some of the assessment of GICs or GCCs, whatever you want to call it, and ask them a simple question, or even some corporates, ask them a question by saying, how many Excel sheets you use today in your organization? How many Excel sheets you use in your organization today, or even a homegrown database? The answer has been the first time none. But I can tell you many of the large GICs and the corporate which believes they have innovative and they have done a lot of transformation. One of them being a beautifully expanded GIC, they talked about having more than 2,000 Excel files. Right? And we're talking about metamorphosis, we're talking about digital. And we are so comfortable with Excel. In fact, I don't know how many of you have experienced job descriptions which say that Excel skill is must, right? And talking about digital and innovation, right? Now all the JDs talks about Excel skill is must, right?
Because some people say that Excel is also digital. That is the belief.
No, you're very right, GV, and I can go on this point because I have some interesting experiences and chats with people. But I think this is where I want to draw some attention from you, Bhaskar, on the single source of truth, where people will ask simple stuff in a lot of these corporates, and I can give you example, multinationals having multi-location presence, listed companies, and if you ask simple information, how many finance and accounting headcount you have across geographies, across business units, band-wise, I asked the question to the HR guy, they gave me a different number. And if I ask a CFO and a controller, he gave me a different number. And if I go and ask somebody else in the business, he will give me a different number. And maybe not true for many of you, but I can tell you my 8 out of 10 experiences, the simple headcount information, I'm not even talking about other things, right? So being different. So where is the single source of truth? Where does this whole current baseline exist in terms of some of these information?
So you stepped on or you made a step on a landmine, but I'll take a step back from there. So I think the baseline when we started off, right, any GIC, shared services for that matter, was more about process efficiency, right? I don't know, SLA driven, reports per FT, and that sort of kind of thing, right? So, but I think if we see the maturity now, at least the ones which have have their feet solidly in the ground and have moved forward in a couple of years, it's more about going and focusing on the business part of it, right? The process, whatever shape is kind of maybe operating, but the business, and especially with the experience of the last 2 years in terms of the headwinds and ongoing challenges. And so it's then the goal, the perspective is all about what is the enterprise, let's say, objective, goal, target, or the headwinds that it's facing, and and what's relevant and what's required today at this point in time in this week to meet, let's say, this quarter's whatever outcomes are desired, right? In terms of whether it's production, whether it's sales, whether it is pricing, whether it is cost. So from a benchmark perspective, I think it is more about then taking those enterprise, what are the goals there, and then trying to kind of getting that aligned. And that's where we become one as a business, right? Now, in doing that is where comes the catch in terms of single source of truth, because you have a number, somebody else has a number, that's red, this is green, and there starts the whole conversation. So I think where there are opportunities and where we've, for example, if I take use cases as that where we have been successful, for example, is taking up and seizing opportunities to create something which wasn't there. And oftentimes it is easy to start that process in a shared service center because you have multiple skill sets sitting and uncontrollable, right? So a shared service leader often can push buttons and get multifunctional people to sit together and get things done up and running. So just an example of, let's say, supply chain, and if I recall the early part of, let's say, 2020, when we had the COVID situation, it's a huge demand for ventilators, a huge demand for oxygen concentrators, something which we as a health tech company do. However, due to China lockdown, due to various other factors, everything was in a limbo. So we had multiple teams coming together, and GBS, for example, stepping up to create solutions that was used immediately within a matter of days, available to the Sinha's management to kind of do modeling to figure out solutions to supply chain businesses. Now, so that gives us, for example, then, so for us, then that became single source of truth in terms of, let's say, what is it that the management needs? And they don't need a perfect answer. The 80-20 is often good enough for decision making. So it's about seizing opportunities, building on what's there, harnessing the opportunities and the talent, and then kind of, solving business problems. Yeah.
No, I think it's an interesting perspective, and I think if I can say the three areas usually we pick it in terms of, I think even Ravi was trying to connect something on this, is there's a whole point of a single source of truth can only connect back to, even Shalini was talking about the data. Unfortunately, the data has become, so much spoken about, and then people talk about this whole point of insight to action without even understanding the data itself. The data even exists or not exist, and in what shape and form it exists. And I can give you very an interesting and funny example. What will you do in terms of transformation where you ask for the simple, I'm still sticking back to the same example of asking for two numbers. In the board meeting for a listed company, the CFO gives a number of a cash position differently and a treasury head giving a different number. What will you do about that? Then talking about headcount information, where the company providing the headcount information, where they are classified into typically a beautiful ERP implementation, where they will have, typically finance and accounts and different terminologies typically they use when they create the masters, right? Employee masters. And you can do all your data slicing and dicing. But you think that somebody has used a classification called money for putting the finance and accounting headcount. How will you drive insights out of it, right? So that connect of the maturity of data, because it is going completely, that cost is going into operations, the manufacturing, because no one is going to look at that staff function cost into the manufacturing and so on and so forth. So the information availability, if I can say, the data availability and the way it is organized plays a very important role if you're trying to drive that transformation or a metamorphosis or a digital or whatever you're talking about, or driving that insights. The second one is also important. I think we talked about the whole point in terms of connecting that insights back to the decision. Unfortunately, there are two components we have seen where the challenge is everybody, a lot of AI tools these days talks about insights to action, but action can only happen after somebody has taken a decision, right? And if they're not taken a decision, how the action will happen? Or they jump to the action directly without the decision. And to have the decision, you need to have not just the analytics or insights. What by design analytics means you break the lot of data into chunks and different pockets of financial, non-financial information. Finally, somebody has to synthesize this information, then only enable somebody to take a decision, and then from decision you go to an action, and from their action you go to the results and so on and so forth. So that's another connect which I wanted to bring out in terms of looking at this entire journey. But maybe a quick comment from you, Suresh, and then maybe after that Venkat will be helpful in terms of your experience of looking at this entire two components which we have been talking so far, is that entire baseline and knowing where you are to really, we talked about contextual benchmark. And second is connecting this entire transformation to metamorphosis. It will be helpful to hear your thoughts, Suresh, and then Venkat. And I think after this I'll request, I know Ranganathan, I have not even got you in, and even Anand. So I would like to request if you can keep it brief and have more topics to have a conversation. Yes, please.
Yeah. Sure. I would like to give my own experience on best in context. So we started our shared services in 2014, and ours is an industrial company. We grew by acquisitions, and first was family owned, and then later on by acquisitions it went public. And when we started the shared services, we were searching for best in class, and everybody had a context. The only thing which came to me was stress, because I didn't know what to take and what not to take. But the interesting thing that happened is we transitioned like 14 different locations, and we understood the processes in each of the areas and each of the plants or each of the locations, and each were very different. And what we did was we took the best in the context. We took the best practices within our organization at each location, and we tried to kind of standardize across the organization, and that kind of helped us to smoothen our process. So we were always searching for, like, I was always challenged as to what is best in class, but coming here I understand that best in context is much better word. And it's within, and again, ours is a very smaller organization compared to many of the folks sitting here. So it's a very, very important term, best in context. I think that I would say it's a very much success story for us following the best in context.
No, absolutely. I think, and interestingly, we have seen sometimes, the large organization, as you were trying to draw a comparison, I think large organizations are able to drive some of these changes, but they have a lot of inefficiencies below because they are tucked under the umbrella of a large organization. But sometimes, smaller organizations have more visibility in terms of those inefficiencies, and you are able to tackle that. Venkat, you want to add something to that?
Sure. Thank you. And let me touch upon a few topics that we were discussing this evening. The first is the innovation quotient, and then going beyond. So on the innovation quotient, like what we said, we need to attach a number. So how do we attach a number? So this is basically how is the business services, the GBS, what is the leverage of that? What is the leverage of business services? And this is what we are pushing from our end. And what we experience is up until now, or up before the COVID time, it was like, it was a pull mechanism. So the business services used to go beyond the business units for the work, but now it is a push mechanism. We notice that the business units is pushing the business services for more and more work. And in terms of going beyond, it was like, automating the inefficient process, but that's no more the ask. The ask is how do you automate and benefit from the efficient processes? That's what is beginning to make a difference. And measuring GBS is also part of the full chain profitability. So what is the GBS contribution to the bottom line? That's what businesses have started looking at. So is it making sense? And let me also add over here to what GV was mentioning about the hybrid model. So hybrid model is not restricted just to the work-life balance, but the hybrid model is also speaking about the business mechanics. So is it purely captive? Is it outsourced? Is captive plus outsourced? What it is? So that is what is the hybrid model looking at. So the ask is not just hitting the target anymore. So are we hitting the target or missing the point? That's the ask. So all the SLAs, KPIs which we are traditionally used to are today considered as basic hygiene factors. So if you go and tell somebody that, your quality is 97%, 98%, your SLA is 98%, that's a fine, but that's why you're here for. So that's no more a driving factor at all. And we also spoke about the transformation. What the businesses are today looking at is how can we move from services to solutions? And how can we co-create? How can the business services help in co-creating the solutions? So it is not that something comes to us, falls on our lap, and then we say that, yes, we have done an excellent job. but how can we work with the business units in actually co-creating the solutions? So this is what we see is the experience, at least from our side, on how things have been moving. And we also spoke about the single source of truth. The ask is, since the business services is integrating all the functions, all the processes, can the business services take the ownership for being a repository of the single source of truth? So any number needed by anybody, be it a manager or be it a board member or be it a director, can they look at the business services as a single truth of source? So this is what we see as a changing dynamic.
Can I request Mr. Ranganathan to make a point on this, and then please.
Thanks. I'm a Videshi in this group, and I owe my presence to my friend of over 4 decades, Ravi. I may actually be making a very discordant note to this discussion, because you are all referring to a different lexicon, talking about innovation, excellence, and great things. My focus comes from risk, because I'm part of governance. I'm not part of business. I'm not part of business processes. I'm part of governance. So when you look at governance, the biggest problem today is managing risk. So you may have a great organization which swears by all those fantastic terms like Six Sigma, business excellence and all that, but then you miss out on a very important issue of risk management. Then the entire board is at risk. So you recently had a case, I think it was from the Madras High Court, which said that if a pharmaceutical company was making substandard products, the entire board of directors is liable criminally. So just imagine the plight of a board member who has absolutely no clue of what is happening behind or in front, but then he needs to take the responsibility for the entire organizational risk management. So the perspective that I would like to bring in is, while many of these things are inescapable, you have to today innovate because disruption is the order of the day. You were earlier innovating to stay ahead in business. Today you have to innovate to stay in the business. So these things are inescapable. But then as you go higher up and higher up, I think the biggest concern today is risk. And risks are very difficult to visualize. Risks are very difficult to be captured in a risk register. Risks are very difficult to be monitored. Many times we don't know what risks we are running in doing a particular business. So the issue is, very often I find the business processes is dictating the business. It's the tail wagging the dog. The boards are failing to provide the vision and the architecture which should set the business in motion, and then the business should dictate to the business processes. Unless we do this, the organizations can go seriously wrong, things can derail, and the directors could be in jail. So my main concern is, you can ask me the question, why am I on some boards? That is difficult to avoid the situation. But then having got onto the boards, I really need to watch out whether some offense is bailable, which lawyer will take me out, and what happens if I get arrested on a Friday evening at 6:30 because the courts don't work till Monday morning, so 2 days anyway I have to spend in jail. And all these things have really happened to different people. People who are of great eminence have got because of things which they did not anticipate. So I don't know where all this connects to what you people are talking. As a slightly older person in the group, I can take the privilege to talk something irrelevant, but you have to really see how do you bring the various things that you are working on in terms of shared service, global business centers, etc. How do you help the board to understand where things could go wrong? See, the problem that I see is very often what analysis comes to the board is dictated by what data is available. So just that the data is available to that extent, the analysis made to this extent, and then it comes to the board as if that's a decision that you need to take. So these things really put a constraint on the board's ability to look beyond the obvious. So I think these are some very stray thoughts, and then I think you're all the experts to see how to keep me out of the jail. That's what I want.
Then I think absolutely. I think, and that's what. Thanks for your thoughts, first of all, Mr. Ranganathan. And I think we were looking for that kind of different views completely from a business point of view, because there's a lot of business services views we can always have, and I think business views is important.
Yeah,
Just 2 quick points to share with you is, I think one is
Rakesh, he's even going beyond business.
talking from board.
Governance. I really like that context, because sometimes, the governance has to focus on risk. And I think that's a very powerful reminder to this audience for us, that at the end of the day, the risk is all-encompassing. The business and the business processes need to address them. Right. And if you don't, then, some of the board members might be going to jail.
And that's why, Ravi, we created a framework, Mr. Ranganathan, and I think for the benefit of all. And that's where I think maybe we are trying to create a bit of engineering so that people can re-engineer that, is we created a framework called value-driven organization. And here when we talk about, and this is another challenge which we have seen, when you talk about value-driven organization, the first connect or immediate connect happens is the financial value, right? We actually defined the value in 3 pockets, and this is not today, much before the pandemic we talked about it in 2019, saying there are 3 components of the value. One is a financial value, the second is a governance value, right, which connects back to the risks. So the business services also needs to play a very important role on the governance value. And the third dimension which we talked about, and as a part of the framework, is experience. And experience not in terms of the client. Actually, there are 3 C's we use: client, customer, and consumer. Because client is who is you deal day in, day out as a business services. The customer is finally the owners of corporate functions and so on and so forth. And consumer finally to the business which is delivering the entire product or the services. So how you look at the experience, and also the employee experience, the supply chain experience, etc., etc. So this whole experience is another dimension we talk about. So financial value, governance value, and experience. And hopefully with that, many of the board members will be out of the jail. The second point, which I think is a very important point, which you talked about, and maybe Anand would like to build on the previous point and this as well, as this whole point of innovation. It's just not about staying ahead. It's about remaining in the business. And we can have a different views by saying, how to look at business dictating business process or business process dictating business. But this whole component of what is available and basis that providing an insight and expecting somebody to take an action or that decision which I was talking about, the decision transformation is very important by looking at what is available. So some thoughts from you, Anand, will be helpful to further build on that.
Thanks, Rakesh, and delighted to be in Chennai amongst many friends here. Thematically, what I wanted to say, Mr. Ranganathan provided a strong flavor of that. I would not have been given that kind of a strength. But essentially, I wanted to just bring our attention to that how do we move beyond before visualizing beyond, before thinking beyond, before anticipating beyond. And all these will not happen till we lift ourselves from business professionals to real business people. And that real business people would mean bringing in a lot of entrepreneurship into your thinking day in and day out. An entrepreneur will think of the risk much faster than those become visible to the rest of the organization. An entrepreneur will start thinking of innovation because he has to or she has to always manage or get much more out of the available resources. An entrepreneur will always be going ahead and seize opportunities and will, most important of all, will be obsessed with the customers. So we talked about manufacturing a lot because manufacturing taught us the precision of the product that we are delivering. But service industry brought another layer on it which makes customer the real king. Manufacturing still many times start with the belief that this is what I want to produce because I think this is the demand of the market. The real test comes when it goes with the service layer associated with it. So all these together only can give us a right framework for making an innovation-driven organization or innovation-driven business, which is not bereft of the overall considerations of cost, control, quality, and risk management. That's what I thought I wanted to bring to the perspective before we get into many of the nitty-gritties that we can talk about. We have some very, very strong and very relevant concept of anti-fragility coming into play. We are also talking of metamorphosis versus a kind of a sequential transformation. Now, can we move beyond without taking the overall value perspective, delivering the impact and the value? That is the question that I leave for the rest of my colleagues here. But I firmly believe that visualizing beyond is a prerequisite, and that will come only when we have a lot of entrepreneurial thinking. Rather than just inside out, you have to look a lot of outside in as well. Thank you.
Rakesh, I just wanted to add something or share something what Mr. Ranganathan said, right? Incidentally, within our GPS, there's one functional area that we support, which is the risk office. Now, we, being an Olam, which is, it's a supply chain and ingredients, into the food and agri business, right? There's a lot of fallback that happens in terms of the risk office reaching out to the folks within GPS whenever it comes to a BRC. When you have a BRC that happens, right, the meeting, we have to provide a lot of reports to kind of, give them that confidence in terms of where the risk is, right? So I think this then kind of entails back to the role that is played by GPS, not just one, just a finance or a procurement or a people services, right? But cutting across multiple areas where GPS is involved, and in some way leans to the topic that we had in the Global Business Services Conclave, collaboration and capability. Going beyond and getting into what fits into everything, which is commitment. You got to be commitment. And if you need to give the competitive edge for the larger organization or the mothership, we have a big role to play. I just wanted to, kind of set some context for that.
Very, very true, very true. And I think this is where some of the business services organization, and we have been talking about GV for some time. Olam has done some different stuff, where you have gone multi-function, cutting across the areas, and also uplifted yourself, just not remaining a back office operations, if I can say, and looking at the business, etc. And connect to that value-driven organization, if I'm saying. So it is just not about that you have a risk as a process or not. Even whatever processes you are doing, it's just about connecting the dots back to the business and looking at financial value, governance value, and governance here when we say it's about risk and other areas put together, and then finally the experience, the way you drive it, so which is very, very important. I wanted to pick a little bit of a thoughts back, and maybe JV, it will be good to hear from you, and maybe I'll request Shalini, you to come in here. Is this whole point on the, which I think even Anand was alluding to, is about inside-out leadership to this whole outside-in entrepreneurship, as we talk about, where, there's a lot of, sometimes, the limitation which you have when you just look at from a typically being a leader versus a mindset of an entrepreneur who believes into that I have to create something different, pull it beyond, and, just not about delivering, but, taking it beyond and taking it from that past barriers or breaking free from the past barriers or the gravitational pull, if I can say. How some of that has been the case for you? If you have any stories to share in terms of being an entrepreneurship leadership, and I know you bring in as an individual yourself, but if any stories, if you can talk about how it has worked for you. And I know it is sometimes not easy to bring that mindset of an entrepreneur to a corporate leader. So how they look?
See, this is more of a leader's dilemma, right? The two faces. You want to be inside out or outside, and then one of the core values of the larger Olam group is basically entrepreneurship, right? And it is like what Anand was saying is, an entrepreneur basically takes risks. It's not that, the evaluation of risk is one side, but it is an evaluated risk that one should take. Otherwise, you cannot be an entrepreneur. So from that context, right, it's kind of driven across the different teams within the larger organization as well as for business services, right? How do you kind of look at both these phases? Inside out is very important in terms of some of the basics that you put in place, like the basic hygiene that you basically create, right? But then the outside end comes in terms of how you then start delivering value to the larger organization. Unless you start looking at it as an entrepreneur, you'll not be able to impact the business outcomes. You'll not be able to add value. I think there are multiple examples that, I can keep, sharing about, right? Whether it be co-creating with the larger organization or where you basically look at something as an entrepreneur, where you go back and tell the business, right, there is an opportunity out here in terms of how it can impact the business outcome. And we had even as we, started our, business services, some of the initial challenges that we faced in one of the business units was related to what they called as OTIF, which is on time and in full delivery, right? So this was something which was new to us, right? But then you had to wear a hat, basically saying that as an entrepreneur, how you do, start looking at it, right? So where we had to build the business knowledge and business context, like what, again, Anand was saying, you have to be business. So we have to typically get into the shoes of being the business and then getting into what was the problem which was there. And then seeing in terms of how you're able to then add the value that the business was seeking in terms of a problem that they are facing, right? Where there are a lot of challenges in terms of meeting the customer expectations. Again, this was related to the end customer, right? So we did a lot of work around it. We, sat with the business. It's about 2-3 months of, value stream mapping, use your different kinds of resources, bringing in a workflow solution, bringing in whatever automation was possible. And then there was a big impact that we were able to create in terms of moving this, OTIF, right, which was, I think I've got Ram in here, who was part of the project, who joins me from Olam, right, in terms of really making a lot of headway where, let's say, OTIF was maybe 50-60%, typically moved on to more than, 90%, right, and one of the impact was that is also in terms of on-time invoicing your customer. Right. If you're not doing it, you're not getting the money back. It's as simple as, you're not able to invoice your customer on time, right, but then it has got a correlation with are able to, first of all, deliver a product to the customer on time, right, then nothing works. So these are examples where you will have to wear the hat of an entrepreneur, not just the leader. I think everybody within the teams that you have will have to have those two faces, an inside out and an outside in. Otherwise it won't work. It will just not work that your leader has got something, then what happens to the rest? That's more of an inculcation of that kind of a mindset to everybody down the line. Only then this works. And incidentally, one of our important core values was entrepreneurship.
Oh, that's fantastic. I think that's very, very helpful. Shalini, some thoughts from you, and then I'll request Ravi, you to come in on this as well.
Sure. Just to build on what GB said and take it a little differently, whether you call it inside in or inside out or outside in. Outside in. The point is, I think in today's environment, the need to really stay very aware of the wider ecosystem is critical. From the vantage point we have, I would say many organizations struggle with this term called innovation quotient. Forget defining it, measuring it. How do you create an innovative culture? Entrepreneurism is more easily said than done and practiced. How do you get it and how do you drill it into a global organization where, it's a lot talked about, but are you really seeing innovation truly happen, driving and making impact? And I think the key there is, and one of the things we see across GCCs is how are they working with the ecosystem partners to actually create that innovation spirit. Not everyone has it, not all organizations are successful, which is where and why we saw the whole accelerator model come up, where one is working with the startup ecosystem, working with academia to infuse the organization with a spirit of innovation that may not naturally be there. So you need a little bit of that external outside-in trigger at times to actually get you to think and look beyond. And I think from where we see it, it's increasingly going to be an imperative. We spoke of the hybrid model, hybrid truly in the context of not trying to do it all yourself. How and where do you lean on others? And I think organizations that will successfully build on that ecosystem play will really create a very differentiated proposition. Today, we increasingly see the new centers coming up who don't want to do it all. They're like, while GCCs have evolved, the vendor ecosystem has evolved even more. So why should we bother? Why not use someone else to do it? Let's stick to what is core to us and what we actually want to do. So the models of today, and just to digress for a minute, but I think when we talk of the industry evolution, a lot of centers who've been around for those 2-3 decades are sitting back and answering this simple question. If we had to set up shop today, how would we do it differently, or how different would it look? And the answer to that is quite startling, because you would do it very differently. So going back to the point, I think being aware of the outside environment, the ecosystem, and leaning on it to drive innovation, I think is a very, very big factor. Easier said than done. Those who've set up accelerators are struggling to sustain those innovation cohorts, but it's important. If you kind of try and do it yourself, it's going to be hard. So lean on what the environment is providing is what I would say.
Sure. I mean, just to add in 30 seconds is basically this whole word agility that is coming into play. Like what she said, the ecosystem, mainly startups. How you're going to partner with the startups, that's a big thing that is, kind of happening now.
Sure. I think this is an area where I'll further come back on the ecosystem part of it. But Ravi, a quick comment from you, and then I'll just move on to the colleagues here.
I think first I must say it's amazing inputs from multiple thoughts. All I wanted to kind of acknowledge one or two points and can add to the. I think Ranga really brought that. Shook the system a little bit, I think, to look at risk, and I think I really called for. And what I really would feel is, and I can give a couple of examples, that today it's not business dictating the business process or business process dictating the business. It's about collaboration. And the collaboration is where I think the sweet spot lies, and collaboration between business and business processes. And there are, I would say, actually our own global centers, some of the pioneering global centers have created some amazing innovations on that. One of the best innovation I can think of is something with the global centers worked with supply chain, on collaborative supply chain. How the marketplace and the GBS will actually be working in tandem to create a supply chain, which is like, what manufacturing terminology I understand, just in time. It's a just-in-time collaborative supply chain which works brilliantly. And I see that it's about one working with the other, which I think is very important. And I think another one I can give an example is, what I've heard of as control service center, again, to talk about risk. How one control service center controls the entire, I'm not saying therefore it kind of adds to the risk, but it's also kind of single source of truth, that whatever controls exist, how do we really make sure those controls are working effectively all the time, every time? I think we still have to go a long way in risk, areas. And I think I would say control and risk are at different dimensions. So I think risk is an area which I feel even I would take away and build the innovation, but I think you really talked about the value, which I think we have talked earlier. A couple of other points, which again touching on the, inside out, outside in. And I think Shalini made a brilliant point, to ask this question, if I were to do something today, will I completely look at it differently? I think it's absolute yes, and I think I have seen organizations not even thinking. For instance, I'm just connecting this so-called scale. Manufacturing understands scale very well. They know if this is economically viable scale or not. Every time, I think any forging industry, I was talking to some people, they would know what forging industry is an investment industry. They would know what is scale for them. So, unfortunately, our business services space scale is not known. They think I've got 100 people, I'll put them together, I'll make a service center. You cannot. It's a scale which is required. And I think Shalini actually talked about a couple of years back on subscale, and I'm sure she can touch upon it later in the conversation, but I do feel If somewhere were to look at, I just want to set up, get the arbitrage, that's not the way today we need to look at. We need to look at how do we really get value delivered, not just cost saves done in the year one. I think it's absolutely crucial. Even, to the point which Ranga, you talked about, I have seen organizations paying through their nose because of transfer pricing concepts, because they are 100% wholly owned subsidiary, a 250-seater, and because they are related party, right, 100% subsidy is a transfer pricing entity, you actually charge 15-20% on the price, and then you have to really cost plus, Why should you do that? So there are a lot of other areas which I think people have to innovate in today's context, as I see it. And last but not the least, I just want to endorse the point which Venkat said, services to solutions. I think that's solution is another area where I think we're really trying to collaborate immensely. And therefore, I feel when we look at entrepreneurship, I think it's something which I think I have beginning to see a larger context. But there also I used to give myself a caution. When the entrepreneurship becomes ownership, when I say ownership, I'm not talking from a leadership point of view, but ownership from a I own so much, or I have the major stake in the company, then it adds to the risk. Entrepreneurship is about taking risk, not adding risk. And I think it's important that entrepreneurs have to remain entrepreneurs in their mind. If they become owners, then I know I can add to the risk because I feel that's the way it is. I think there also I have given cautions to people, make sure that you are entrepreneurial mindset, but don't take ownership beyond, in a situation where you add risk to the entire, that's where I think it becomes an attachment, or it becomes a certain amount of, seeing that oneness where you need to see them in terms of that detached attachment. So I think some of these points I want to touch upon, but more to come in. And I really felt amazing in terms of the current conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Ravi. And I think we all have learned from you, and I think the way you use this term, add to the risk versus take the risk, and those kind of terms, I think they're very powerful, and I'm sure a lot of us will have a lot to learn and take on some of those, because I still remember one of the concepts long time back, about 15-16 years back, Ravi and I was talking about from a difference between an interesting term, centralization, because usually, I'm talking about 16 years back, right? Centralization versus shared services. And shared services started with a lot of centralization. He said, 40 years back also we used to talk about centralization and decentralization. So what is new? And the shared services has to be different than centralization, right? So the term which actually Ravi used, and I still remember, is centralization is all about control on business unit. So it's a control on the business unit, while shared services is about control for the business unit, right? So that's again a mindset which brings a huge difference. So, and similarly, it's about adding the risk and taking the risk, and it brings a lot of value. And I think even the services to solution point, I further, and I just want to take some conversation ahead, and maybe Hema, you can come in, and then maybe I would like to get Geetha, you to come in on this point, is this whole barriers which we talk about in terms of the current state. When you evolve something, like talking about a lot of solutions and everything, but when you try to create something and build something, how much of the current situation or the past becomes a barrier for you, and how leaders who really play that entrepreneurial mindsets tries to come out of that gravitational pull, if I can say, because the past is a barrier while you have to build on it. But sometimes, I can give you an example. For instance, there's an interesting saying. It's like, when you create a strategy, you still use past, but when you visualize, you are thinking future. So how an entrepreneurs many times look at as a mindset, they visualize. So how do you look at that in the context of your experience and organization? Maybe, and then Geetha, you can come on that point.
To pick up the learnings, right? What we have failed in the past, we have to kind of take that and then start building on the future. That's very, very important. And most of the time we will have the gravitational pull, so to say, because people want to kind of talk through the failures that we've had and things like that. But again, coming back to the leadership entrepreneurial mindset, it's simple. So we can keep on saying that, okay, this metrics that we had so many of input compliance issues, blah, 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 and those kind of things. But when you actually go into an entrepreneurial mindset, we kind of say that, okay, I'm going to help you solve this particular problem. This is how I'm going to influence this outcome for you. So that really helps. And second thing is, a lot of us don't have the time, right? So many companies, if you take solution services, they are several decades behind. So when will you catch up, right? So if you have to kind of do step by step by step by step, it will take a very, very long time. But, some of these partners can help us in that journey to say that, okay, don't climb 20 steps, take a lift and then come, straight away. So those are some things that we have to look at. Not everybody will have that journey. Learn from somebody's mistakes or learn from somebody's experience. Get the new partners, who have done that successfully for the others. Do a copy paste. I mean, one of the organizations that I've worked with, they say, why do you have to reinvent everything? Somebody has done it, just do a copy paste and customize it to your requirements, right? So those are some things that we need to kind of do. And when you take these solutions, to your customers, partners, we just have to say that this is what is in it for them, right? Yes, I felt it in the past. This is why past, gone. But these are some things, the visions that we have. This is the mindset that I have to kind of make this successful for you, not for me, right? So those are some things, some conversations which are really, really going to help. Because again, if as a leader, if you kind of go by your metric, that's not going to help at all. But we'll have to kind of go and understand, the other person's problem. And one of my managers used to say that, don't spend time on your goal sheet. Go and spend time on the goal sheet of your partners, right? So who you're going to work for and how you can help them in that particular journey. I think those are the mindsets that we'll have to bring it into place.
Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting perspective in terms of changing that mindset. Geetha, I want to add something to it.
Yes, definitely.
And then after this, I'll come to you, Venkat, if you have something to share on this point. Yeah.
Sure. A lot of what Hema said resonated, but from my experience, couple of things have helped. So the first thing is really talking about what's worked well for others. Looking at the data, and as an example, when you talk about GCCs, we have about 1450 GCCs, and maybe about 50 to 55% of them are more in the range, in the space of innovation centers, and then maturing into becoming partners. And you talk about the opportunity that lies ahead, and let's say you're somewhere in the middle. There's a huge opportunity that lies ahead, and this is in the context of how you convince, let's say, your center, to say that don't look at us for cost arbitrage. And to build on what you said, I think, Venkat, it's got to move beyond that, to look at efficiency and to look at innovative solutions, co-creating solutions. Because, as an example, if you can together build a solution where you can create a market space for you in an uncharted territory, that's a huge opportunity, and that's a potential that rests within India. So it's all for me about pulling the data, pulling the examples, but also it's about storytelling, right, in a way that resonates with them. And for example, I'll take an example and say, today you're selling, the services to a client at a certain blended rate. If you flip it and say you push 70% of the work, to the India center, this is what your blended rate would look like at, 40% cheaper or 50% cheaper. And it's not about just margin expansion. You're securing more work in a competitive environment where your client wants more for, less. So it's about connecting the dots, storytelling, and using data intelligently. I think that has helped. And obviously, as you talked about, risks, different companies have different risk appetites. And when you want to be an entrepreneur, you really don't want to be too much bound by risks. So there's a bit of risk taking there when you talk about innovating and all of that. So it's finding that balance, and it's never easy. You got to keep falling sometimes and learning, and then, picking up and moving along. So that's been the approach I think I've taken.
Sure. Very, very helpful. Some thoughts from you, Venkat, and may I request Mr. Ranganathan, your thoughts from again on this whole idea of outside in leadership. Some nuggets will be helpful. So after Venkat.
Yeah. Hema was speaking about this cut and paste solution. While I would say that it doesn't work always, because every solution or every requirement for that matter is totally different, unique. If you have to do a cut and paste, invariably what we see is the innovative part of it doesn't come. Because you have copied a solution, it's working well, and then you leave it there. So there's no value add in that. But also the question could be that, okay, do you need to spend time and effort and the money in designing a solution? So it purely depends upon what you're looking for. And I would say that cut and paste is not the answer. You need to spend that time and effort in the long run. So like, we are saying that it's no longer of to innovate to be different in the business, but you need to innovate to stay in the business. So from that perspective, I know you have to innovate right from day one over here. And also on this topic of fragile versus resilient, which we spoke about, I think today that is the need of the hour. That is the need of the hour, and the last 2.5, 3 years have taught us several things in this direction. It has taught us several things, and the whole scenario, the whole ways of doing business has changed. Whole ways of doing business has changed. So when you talk about ways of doing business, it is not just about cost and cost cutting or cost management. It is about what is the value quotient that you're giving to your partner. What is the value quotient that you're delivering to your customer? That is what is going to make the big difference in the coming years, I would say.
Sure. No, it's interesting perspective, and I think maybe, sir, for you, some thoughts from you.
This point that I want to make arises not so much from personal or a hands-on experience, but what I have heard about a particular context. See, there is a potential disruption to this business itself, which is the shared service, global business, doing more of offshoring into India, etc. Because of the various political changes in different geographies, there is today an apprehension to move businesses which are core to the processes to other countries. They don't want to expose it to certain political oversight. They are afraid of some of the governments taking control of, for example, core R&D being done in India. Today there is a concern about getting certain things done in India because of some potential risks that they see. So this is arising from the whole disruption to the supply chain, arising from maybe political changes globally and mindset in terms of the governments, data security related issues. So now the question is whether this itself is a very sustainable format in which these processes would actually happen. Concentrating processes in a particular country which services different geographies today may be looked up as very differently compared to how it all evolved some 15, 20 years ago as a caste arbitrage. So some of these things itself will be driving the decision from the business in terms of what to do where. So you'll really need to factor that into this whole discussion that you're doing. So it's perhaps a thought that I wanted to share.
And I think it's a very important point, and maybe Anand, you can share some thoughts in terms of the overall operating model as the things are evolving and changing, and operating model as it varies. So there are multiple dimensions of the operating model. While I think these days we tend to lean towards more on the anywhere operations with the operating model, which is one component for sure, but there are multiple other components which work with the operating model. So some thoughts from you will be helpful.
Sure. I think this entire operating model question in the context of innovation and moving beyond and visualizing beyond is a very critical one, and luckily a lot of innovation is already happening in this space, and as you rightly said, this model can be looked at not only from a locational perspective where GV also talked about this hybrid, how much work from home versus working along with other colleagues sitting inside the office in the old classic way, and all those stuff, but it's also how do you actually construct the entire model of your operations of business services, which gives you the best buck for the money, okay, and best result out of the resources that you are able to invest in. And that's where I also link it back to my favorite topic of entrepreneurial thinking around it. That's where I can quickly share the experience that in our company itself, we have what we take pride in, that it is an innovative model, operating model by itself, global first, what we call a dedicated captive, which has a texture and a mindset of a captive, but the service orientation and operations on a arm's length basis as a third party service provider basis. And we have, I can go on and go on, but basically what we are trying to combine here is the best of both worlds, where you keep the core of the innovation principles at the helm, right as you design any particular solution, and where we derive a lot of capabilities from the ecosystem around us. So, especially when you give it a context of India, the entire technology stack which is building around us by very bright young minds, how do you collaborate and leverage on that in a business services context and still produce what gives best value for the customer. And that value, in fact, we also go beyond and we say that value cannot just be delivered, it has to be co-created. And to co-create value, you have to focus on, first visualize the potential of the value, identify it, and then measure it and, deliver it and then measure it. And a lot of our customer contracts are also designed around this entire value delivery, where we approach the customer with a clear proposition of, and this is where again another innovation, when the business services, one of the metric of measuring our growth has been traditionally in the FTE terms, and we are discarding it right up front. We are saying that there is only one starting point, one measure, a small little measure. It's the value delivered, and how do you partake in that, share in that value that should, as an organization, be actually the real measure of your business growth. So these are a few quick thoughts. Rakesh.
No, I think absolutely. And actually, I connect to an interesting quote from someone who was running a levers shared services, a gentleman by name K. Ramesh. Actually, I was having a chat with him long time back. I think must be in 2010/11, if I recall correctly. And he made a point, Rakesh, if I can keep the value created by the shared services, I would ask corporate not to fund me. Right, so that's a kind of value I generate, right? So the value is maybe sometime 2x, 3x, at least 1x of the cost of the entire center. That's the way we look at it, I think, and that's what Anand you're talking about. Typically, many of the, there's another one, I'm just digressing for 30 seconds, and we've done a lot of survey and research where we have seen even the cost of the term fully loaded cost is not very well appreciated or comprehended by many of the business services. They still look at more in terms of charge out or a cost plus, or look at more in terms of the personal cost connected, etc. I think that's another area where, again, it's a different level of maturity of the organizations, but I think even looking at simple things like fully loaded cost and the value delivered, there's a simple concept which we are talking these days about, at least 2x as we call it. If your fully loaded cost is X, you should be able to deliver 2x, and if not, and value, again, going back to the context, we said value is about in 3 pockets we define the value, not just the financial value, but financial value, governance value, and the experience value. If you connect this 1x to 2x, I think it is important. Sunil, we missed you for a lot of time. I know it was one of those days. But good to have you here, and I think maybe it will be helpful to hear from you a bit. We've been talking a lot on the areas of what we call innovation quotient and nurturing that innovation quotient, and we talked about quotient by design is a number and how to look at that. And I think while you are an organization where a lot of regulations, compliances, etc., how do you connect from a business services? That's another context, just want to give you a flavor. We were talking about business process and business services center talking back to the businesses saying, I can innovate and I can innovate for you as a business. So any different views or experiential stories from you, Sunil?
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Sorry about being late. So we serve the globe, and therefore we have our own set of standards. To put the things in perspective, you're talking about innovation quotient or the value quotient, which has been realized by shared service centers. I think there's no doubt in anybody's mind. We being an organization which doesn't work on the profit basis, but on a cost center basis, but still we have the same objective in mind. And I think as a part of the shared services, it is true, and we have proven beyond a concept that easily 3x is the quotient that we look at. Now, you will be talking about World Bank, and World Bank on innovation quotient. It is, we are very high on that. And when we talk about innovation, we have two things in mind. One is client centricity, that we want to keep the impact on client in mind. And when we talk about client, it is our external client, whether it is our investors, whether it is our borrowers. We keep that in mind. Second is that we also want to look at our internal processes because we want to make it efficient. And that helps in terms of faster delivery, to improve our, whatever you call it, 3x or 2x, that is basically cost of delivering the services. Now, to give you some examples, to put the things in context, what I'm talking about, from the operation standpoint, it may not be delivered from the shared services, but from the bank perspective. We have tested smart technologies in the operations. To give you an example, we have blockchain lab, and we kind of get money from the market, to invest in our developing nations. So we issued a bond, which is using blockchain technology. So we wanted to test that ourselves as a leader of international organization, seeing that, okay, how this technology can help us right from start to finish, so that, we have that, the platform which was developed and issued a bond to test for ourselves. And it was quite successful. It was an Australian dollar bond that we issued. The second, the example that I can quote in terms of innovation is that, we do make a lot of investment in terms of health, in terms of looking at where we have to make our interventions. So we get a lot of data points in terms of how health indicators are trending based on the investments that we make. And we use machine learning to read those data points and learn from that and see that whether the meaningful investment has been made in the relevant pockets where it should go to. And then we do kind of our own analysis using those technologies. Another example from the operation side is that, we have a water and sanitation, the infrastructure global practice. And it's in case of Kerala, we connected with the Kerala government to look at, there is a project, they want to know that where the irrigation levels, where the water supply can be channelized appropriately, because water is a scarce commodity. So we used Internet, IoT, Internet of Things, to kind of understand where the water is available, where it can be channelized, where it can be further regulated. So, these technologies we use for our developmental objectives. Now, coming to the shared service centers, our journey on the digital transformation has been only about, I would say, 4 years ago. And, I was reading the brief that you gave. You looked at benchmarking, whether structured benchmarking or unstructured benchmarking. We have, all the way, our eyes and ears on the ground. I am coming to this forum not to talk about our journey, but also to learn from you. So that's very unstructured. So we have our, the digital transformation where we have, kind of looked at our rule-based business processes, looked at repetitive processes, look at, I don't think that humans want to do those processes because it's so mundane. Nobody wants to kind of invest their time and energy, which is not meaningful, which other people can, other, technologies can do it. So we started with the robotic process automation, and it was like in a bank, we have different units which are very empowered units for rightly, and it works for us actually. So we have to have governance around that so that we can kind of make a business case and try to showcase the benefits and the ultimate, whatever the quotient that you're talking about, 3x or 2x. So by demonstrating the proof of concept, proving on that, and we started 4 years ago. Now we have 100 plus bots. To give you an example, we serve about 120 countries from our shared service center. And each of the country has a requirement of funds. And they basically request funds replenishment on a periodic basis. And we said other humans were, kind of deployed to do that. And we said that it's so simple. Why humans should invest their time in that? Why can't bot do it? It's very rule-based. The request come from country office. There will be some parameters, rules governing that, and we develop that technology. It works fine. So ultimately, there was a lot of skepticism when we kind of embark on these technologies, because people always think that their jobs are going to go, and our motive was very clear, that it is not to take out the jobs. Rather, it is trying to create a bandwidth for people to do other jobs which they would be relevant for them in terms of the future of their work. So I think it has been working well, and it's not that we have reached the point of arrival. It's a journey that we are on to it.
No,
Thank you.
Thanks, Sunil, for your perspectives. I think left with few minutes before I also allow a few questions from the audience, but I think just absolutely brief. I call it a little like rapid fire at the end of the sessions like this. And if you all can just keep it very brief on a couple of areas, want to take a quick comments from each one of you. And please do come in as if you have anything to add to it. I think the two areas, one is where I wanted to spend, I think a lot of has been talked in terms of the entrepreneurship. And if you're looking at outside in view, you connect with an ecosystem. And there's a term which Geoffrey Moore gave in 2019 called power of escape velocity. And I talked about gravitational pull. So as we are moving towards anti-fragility from resilience, you can always do it through the power of escape velocity. How many of you know what kind of a speed rocket needs to achieve to go beyond the gravitational pull? Any idea? What kind of a speed rocket reach to go outside that gravitational pull? Very precise, very close to that. It is 11.2 kilometers per second, which is about 4,000 kilometers per hour. Do you have any vehicle? किसी के पास ऐसी car which drives at 4,000 kilometers? We all are very ready to drive that, right? If you have a car. So as in the beginning, Ravi was talking about, it's a time, if you really want to go out of that gravitational pull, the only way you can go out of the gravitational pull is by taking that or achieving that escape velocity. That escape velocity for each of the organization will be different. In some cases, it will be like 11.2 kilometers per second, but it has to be that momentum where you can go out of that gravitational pull. And hence, one of the components of escape velocity is also about looking at, actually there's a 3-dimension, Geoffrey Moore talks about the component, the systems and processes, and the business model. From the component points, and it is not about the people, it talks about capacity and capability. And it says that capacity and capability, it's not that you should not create within, but the same point of time how you leverage the ecosystem. And today this is all about as a service, software as a service, infrastructure as a service, food as a service, and etc. Capability as a service, transformation as a service, technology as a service, and so on and so forth. So how are we experiencing that? Will be a very quick comments I look from all by saying, if you really want to drive this escape velocity or achieve the escape velocity, how are you looking at the balance between the capacity and the capability, creating something within versus the ecosystem, and how are you looking at that? Any quick comments? GV, you want to go first? Okay. So anyone here, you want to just go first? Venkat, you want to go first?
Yeah.
And keep it brief, please. Yeah.
It has to be a hybrid model. It has to be a combination of various things. Combination of experience, expertise, cost, everything. And the appetite. So there, you can't say that you do this and then you'll get the speed. No.
Yeah.
Because in today's context, it has to do that. And because we are not creating it for the moment.
Sure.
We are creating it for a sustainable.
Sure. Good point. Bhaskar, you want to come in?
Yeah. I think given the times we are in and getting into, right? So data literacy, digital mindset, these are like fundamentals and keys to probably any change that we want to bring and going to bring tomorrow. I think the other part is things have accelerated much faster. Change comes much faster. Every 2 years is almost a cycle for almost the next 2.0, 3.0, 4.0 into any model of either it's platform, architecture, process, design. So the capability to live and kind of, innovate with that speed are the two things I think equally important.
Yeah, okay, sure. Any thoughts from here? Anybody? Hema, you want to add something to it from ecosystem point of view? Any thoughts if you have? Suresh, Hema, you have any thoughts to add?
For your rocket to go at that speed, you need a very strong launching pad. So I think for any organization to take wings, you need a strong foundation. I think that's the very key thing. I don't know, very often people miss out on that point.
Right.
Just creating the right foundation for it to be able to.
And just building on that point, Mr. Ranganathan, I think I also want to hear that thought between the balancing of that capacity and capability which you create in-house for everything versus looking at that ecosystem where there's a lot of as-a-service model available. How do you balance that is another point. So any thoughts on that? Yeah, Geetha, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. So I do want to mention that clearly, the future is all about partnerships and ecosystems and platforms, digital marketplaces. Nobody would have imagined the model that Uber and Airbnb came up with, right? They don't own resources, but they share. And it's all about network effects. I think in the context of our businesses as well, it's two things. One is unlearning, how we've been doing business and how we've been getting support from, internal sort of teams or, how are we able to source this outside. It's about unlearning and learning. And secondly, yeah, while I take your point, I think, Venkat, about, building it for the long term, I think also equally you should be willing to test it out for a short term and course correct if it doesn't work. Because then it gives you that advantage and flexibility to try out, let's say, even for your, hiring process. You can engage a partner who has a reach through digital means. So that's something we're doing. So I feel it's about being open-minded, being willing to unlearn and learn, and maybe take a bit of risk.
Sure. Ravi, you want to go?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I think, again, going back to my manufacturing philosophy, I think the challenge in the business services space, they think ecosystem is outside the system. That is completely wrong. If I go to the manufacturing, they will tell ecosystem is part of my assembly. They will never say this is outside my assembly. Ecosystem is integral part of the organization. I think that's a mindset we have to shake. Ecosystem is not outside the system. You need to imagine the whole where make and buy has to coexist. It is not make versus buy. There will be some areas we have to take a call, but it is not about make versus buy all the time. It's about make and buy, and that holistic system has to be seen. Ecosystem is not outside the system. It's an important reminder I tell myself when I connect manufacturing to services.
No, I think it's a very powerful point, Ravi, and I think we keep talking about shop-made versus bought out, and we know many of the companies in manufacturing which they finally assemble everything. So ecosystem pretty much becomes integral to the final finished good which we create. So it's a mindset shift pretty much. GV, you want to add something to it?
Yes, I think, to me it is more of, capability, capacity, ecosystem, right? It's a balance that you need to strike, right? It's not that everything you need to have it in-house, right? And like what Ravi was also talking about is you'll have to look at it as in one totality, right? You call it outside the ecosystem or within the ecosystem. It's one total part that you have to see it as. And again, unlearning, very important. And I think very importantly, I just want to kind of share more like could be a philosophical statement, right? If we said change is a constant, right? So if there's a change happening, and if you change after the change has happened, typically you're surviving. If you're changing along with the change, you succeed. But if somebody who's actually creating the change is who's leading it, I think we'll have to see it in terms of where do you want to fit yourself to be, right? Whether it be part of what you want to build as capability or capacity or take the help from the ecosystem, you'll have to see in terms of whether you want to survive, succeed or lead. You'll have to be in one of these three. Otherwise, you're going to be a failure. And that's what I believe.
No, I think very, very powerful.
So, my take is that when it comes to capabilities and capacity, it has to be balanced. But what is important is that you create, develop, leverage, and lead, and not necessarily in that order. The order could be very flexible and very, very contextual.
Yeah.
No,
If I can
yes, Sunil.
just, I think it is, it's a perfect science. How do you kind of balance it out? It depends upon the core competency of the organization that you want to bank upon. You will definitely leverage the core competency which exists in the organization, and you leverage what is outside that. And to Ravi's point, that becomes an integral part of the ecosystem. So that, when you show this as at an arm's length relationship, I don't think that it is going to be sustainable, because then it's a supplier and vendor relationship. If you really want to, Ravi's point, as an integral part of the ecosystem, then you have to embrace that change, embrace that capability which exists outside the organization, within the organization, through that vendor relationship. Thank you.
No, I think it's very, very, very powerful points. I think one area I know this is something, and this is the last point, and again, quick comments from here and all the panelists here is this so much we talk about, and I think GV, you initially talked about this whole new operating model and how you look at this operating model, which you're talking about, even Anand added to it. It is just not about anywhere operations, but the trigger of this new operating model has been multiple dimensions. In your case, it has been more talent, as you talked about, and talent, of course, connecting to that, and maybe you can talk a minute for that. Any thoughts from anywhere else? But how are you looking at this whole new operating model with something which is innovation or innovating, and not just limiting and saying, it's about, yeah, it's a hybrid is good, and we have heard a lot about that, right? So idea is to see what is that trigger and what kind of innovation quotient which you're bringing into this new operating model. So some thoughts will be helpful here. G, you want to go first, but keep it brief, please. I know you're very passionate about that.
To be very brief, it's a new working model, but give a couple of years, I don't know what it will get into. Right. So for now, we believe that's something that's enabling.
The talent piece is very powerful. I'm sure people will be.
It is, because you're relating everything back to this innovation. What I also mentioned about in terms of this entire digital disruption which is happening, or what has happened over the last 2 years, is also building or eating into this whole innovation quotient, right? And obviously, without talent, it's not going to move, right? And this is enabling not just business services, but organizations to look at talent across the board. There's no limitation. I think that's, to me, is the biggest differentiator. But again, 2 years down the road,
something will change, right?
Yeah.
And that's why you have to keep preparing for it. Yes. Any quick comments from here?
Yeah, just an additional perspective to that. The flexibility aspect and going back to the drawing board is very, very important. We can always keep looking at different things, but we'll have to keep checking that, yes, I'm willing to go back to the drawing board, and then I'm willing to change if something is not working. I think that commitment should be there from everybody. It's not that one solution that we'll have to stick to for 10 years, right? So I think that is very, very important. And from a flexibility perspective, I think it's not the leader just who has to be having an entrepreneurial mindset, right? It can come from our employees as well. So we just go back to them and say that, okay, this is the problem that we have, come back with a solution, right? And then I allow all kinds of flexibility to be able to move with, obviously, the risks and controls and all those things in mind, which is something we can control. So if we kind of do that, that's really kind of a true hybrid model as I see it. You don't tell me when I have to work, right? Tell me what is the deadline and I will finish it. So that's the kind of, if we get to that mindset, I think that's true hybrid.
Yeah, interesting. I just want to, you have a point, right? And as before you come in, I think I would request if we spend next 5 minutes after Shalini's comment to hear from all of us, and feel free to come in with your questions, comments, perspective, to share how do you look at this moving beyond How do you look at this entire innovation quotient? While we might have talked from some pointers like baselining, benchmarking, we talked about something in terms of looking at best practices to contextual practices and BIC to BIC. We spoke some of these areas in terms of inside out to outside in an entrepreneurial mindset. We talked about the ecosystem part of it and also connecting that entire transformation to metamorphosis and how to look at multifunction and multidimensional. So there are multiple components we spoke, but I'm sure you may have something to pick from your point of view, from your organization, and you like to add to it. So I would urge and request you to share your perspective, and can we have a hand mic if anybody wants to add to it. But before that, Shalini, you just make a point and then we'll go.
Sorry, I'll keep it brief, but when you spoke of where the future is headed and where we are going to, 20 years ago when first shared services came about, there was this huge concern around the change part to say, what will it mean? Is this lights out processing? As you move it remotely, will people get totally redundant? We're still processing today and we're still talking of people. But, from what was cutting checks and processing payable transactions to now looking at procure to pay transactions, we're still transaction processing. There's a big part of it. But if you look at the future and you start imagining blockchain technology and what that will do to the cycle, when you have your suppliers, the organization, your vendors, your banks, everyone online, do you actually need anyone processing anything? Or what is that technology going to do? And is it really going to be lights out processing in the future? So the point I'm making is the power of envisioning the future and where are we headed to is equally important as is the foundation, because that will really take you to another orbit if you look at what the future holds. And in 3 years from now, I'm not sure we'll be talking something quite different.
Just 30 seconds, Rakesh. I think just one point I wanted to make, I feel, based on the conversation we said, I think we need to go beyond value chain to value networks. Because, by design, as we know, chain is supposed to be having a consistent, same kind of beats to come in. But I think, building on what Shalini also said, that I think if we're really talking about ecosystem, capability, capacity, it has to combine big and small. Actually, I used to ask this question, how big is small? And to me, there is a necessity for us to look at networks, value networks, to be looked at for the future if business services and businesses have to innovate. If they just limit themselves to just value chain as a concept, they will still not go out of the box to think differently.
No, thank you. Yeah.
30 seconds on the hybrid model. People are asking question, why they are coming to office? So the response to that is that it is not the old wine in the new bottle. It has to be the new wine in the new bottle. There has to be purpose which they have to come to office, and it's up for the leaders and the employees to determine that purpose, because that's very clear. People are smart. Thanks.
No, very, very rightly put. I think we have some wines here any which ways, and both the vintage wine as well as the new wine. So that's a good point. But I think before we go there, I think I request some perspectives from here. Yeah, I can see a hand here. Can we have a mic here, hand mic? Can somebody bring a hand mic here, please? Yes, Sudev. Yeah, please. Just keep it brief, Sudev. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, my name is Sudev from Olam. I just wanted to pick up what Sunil just mentioned about purpose. I think, especially linking back to innovation, I think research has shown that I think organizations with a higher purpose are able to drive innovation much better. I think the purpose, and especially coming from Olam, I think our purpose is reimagining agriculture, how we touch the livelihood of farmers, and so on and so forth. I think that will drive a lot, especially we are talking from a futuristic perspective. Second key point is, I think we talked a lot about process and technology, but I think the investment in the future has to be on people. I think they will be the real innovators. I think it will be the people, how they think differently, design thinking, and digital mindset some people talked about. I think investing on people will be more important for the innovation to come in. So 2 points. Otherwise, very interesting thoughts, Rakesh, from everyone.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thanks, Sudev. Just a quick point on that. I think again in the investment, we talk about if you're looking to go from here to Mars, right, or a moon, whatever you want to take it, it calls for a different speed. And same way, if you want to grow as a 10x as an organization, you can't do a 10% investment. Investment again here is not just financial investment. It's a mind share, thought leader. Could see some more hands. Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, I have the mic. Can I go? Yeah, please. Sure. My name is Vandana Sheth. I'm with Kohler. So for Kohler, as a company, has a huge legacy, right? 150 years plus. But the shared services concept is very new. We started our journey in June 2021. Now, this is a perspective which, I want to add on to what GV had shared. Like the entire transition of services globally, for HR and finance happened remote, right? Right from recruitment to training, knowledge transfer, all of it. So now, we have come into we are like at the fag end of the transition journey and, we're almost BAU. But, one challenge that we see today, as much as this flexibility in terms of having, talent remote, getting them from other locations, the challenge is on the engagement part, not as an employer, we, coming up with these 100 various ways of engaging them, but from the associates, right? When they compare themselves with other organizations, they're like, no, I'm remote and I'm missing out on this. So I don't know how many of you are facing this, because this is the other side, the challenge, as much as we are taking advantage. So this is something I wanted to probably throw this out here and understand, how to tackle this.
No, it's an interesting question.
Sorry.
I think I'm sure a lot of panelists here would like to jump into it. But before that, maybe some perspective. Somebody, yeah, I can see a hand here. Please, sir.
Wonderful topic here today, nurturing the innovation quotient. I think it's very perspective because innovation is about people. It's about the war for talent. The war for talent is all across the globe. Our industry here, the shared service industry, is at least 25 years old in India. And yet it took us a pandemic to realize that the very structure of this particular talent is not restricted to, if my shared service is in Hyderabad, I need to have my talent back in Hyderabad or in Pune or in Mumbai or in Chennai. It took us a pandemic to realize that we can go for a war for talent anywhere in India. But that's not the limitation that we want to hold ourselves to. It'll probably take another pandemic for us to realize that we can go on a global war for talent. That's my point number one. Observation number two, Mr. Ranganathan had spoken very nicely about the point of risk. I'm proud to have worked for an organization called Merrill Lynch. It was a 96-year-old organization in the year it failed. You mentioned about disruption and how disruption, as usual, is very important before we can innovate. Now, just one causative aspect to risk. The CEO of the company at that point of time made a historic statement. This was in January of 2007, where he said, risk is a 4-letter word. Anybody who uses it will be outside this company. Merrill Lynch, we all know what happened in 2008. It just took a year for a 96-year-old organization to historically go down the hill. But two very important aspects of that are, A, as we innovate, let's keep the risk quotient in mind. Two, it's not about centralization like you appropriately said. It's about ensuring that our talent pool is centralized, not the locations. So just some thoughts.
No, very, very important. I think I can see some hands here. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, this is Rishabh from Olam. I think one, as shared service organizations, right, as GBSs, relating to the innovation concept, we have to also, and the point on purpose that we were talking about, right, the purpose for existence of shared services itself in the last couple of years has changed dramatically, right? And that itself is an innovation by itself. When traditionally it has been cost arbitrage and of late automations and things like RPAs and stuff like that. But last couple of years, what we have heard a lot is a lot of organizations that never wanted to be having a shared services or GBSs. COVID times have shown them, right, that work can happen remotely or from various different locations, and technology can play a big role. So the purpose of shared services itself, apart from being cost arbitrage and automations and stuff like that, transformations, a lot of organizations are looking at their own survival in tough times, in times of risk, to Mr. Ranganathan's point, on how shared services are actually helping them even survive in times like COVID and times like, which are more challenging in nature. So the purpose of shared services, the value that shared services bring, and the kind of innovation that is required for such organizations to even survive, right? It's not just about cost arbitrage or automations and RPAs, but even how we help organizations survive. I think our own purpose as a shared services set up on need to innovatively think in times such as these on how we can add value to organizations, and not just about cost arbitrage and stuff like that, right? So,
no, absolutely, very, very fair point. I think you have to think of how you contribute back to the business, and I would just add to it by just not just sustain, but even think of how you can further add to grow. That's another perspective which we keep thinking of. Yes, please. Yeah. Just before this. Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Harris from Philips, and I lead the transformation team. So I really appreciate all the thoughts which is coming across, right? So innovation code, what we are talking about. I think one of the things which I wanted to share is we are sitting in a gold mine when we talk about shared services. I think somebody touched upon this point. I'm sorry, I don't recall who did that. We have options of looking at what happens across different regions, countries, processes, right? Let's take, if you take a particular country, they can only see what's happening within them. But we take processes, like example, we have FP&A process. We do it for across the globe. So we look at the reports across. So we have the option to look at across, and it also gives us the opportunity to innovate and do it quicker. There is an opportunity that we can think from an entrepreneur mindset, because you see it overall at a whole scale. And as leaders of the shared services, there's a larger responsibility than just deliver what is required, right? So, we touched upon the topic of co-creating solutions, which is what is expected today, right? That's today's expectation. But is that something which we want to do it, we continue? Possibly, but we need to get into the journey as soon as possible. So I think these are some of the very, very valuable concepts which I hear. And thank you for bringing these topics.
Yeah. One more last comment. I think I could have seen a hand here. And then a quick comment from someone from here to respond to. Hema, you want to go for that response? Okay. So there are 2 comments, and then I think we have earned a lot to open that bottle of wine.
Thank you from Philips. I had this operation for APAC. Thank you, Mr. Ranganathan. Very pertinent points. I think finally at the end of the day, we hit the nail on the head to what Shalini said, right? Why is pretty clear. Why we want to do innovation quotient is pretty clear. And to what Dr. Venkat was saying, right? All green metrics is bread and butter. Sir, that is gone. Everyone is forgetting. Innovation quotient is becoming bread and butter now. If my managers, my team leaders don't talk about innovation, then we are not even having a discussion. So that is how it is going. And keeping what Ranganathan sir has said, in future with all geopolitical issues and all automations, robotics, and every company taking example of Amazon, you click and order goes, how do we get to that point? I think in next 2 years, like Shalini said, right? Finally, she said it. After 2 years, we might be having completely different discussion. All the shared services, 60% of what we do might not be there. So what we need to think is, how do we bring that innovation quotient in people? Is it scale up, go outside, look for talent? How do we do it? I think for us, the focus area should be that, in my humble view.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks. Hema, quick comment from you, and then.
So I think your question is more in terms of, in a hybrid model, people might feel that they are left out, or they're kind of, not being considered.
I think where I'm coming from is they're very happy with the flexibility that it offers.
Yeah.
But at the same time, when someone is following hybrid, there are few who are completely remote, because there are some roles that are completely remote. But these are people who come with this, requirement that, no, I want to be in office, right? But then I don't want to be as well. So that is the challenge.
So again, unless there are regulatory requirements for somebody to be there, I think we as company allow that kind of flexibility, because again, there are do's and don'ts in both the models, right? Some people want to kind of frantically want to get out of the house and then come to an office, be in a collaborative environment, and then work with people and things like that. I mean, practically, if you actually see if you're actually working in the office, right, you kind of switch off after 8 hours. But in, work from home kind of an environment, you're technically available 24/7, right? So that's the kind of mindset that people have. So I think if there is no requirement for people to come back or stay back, right? So I think the flexibility is what should be allowed. And that's what a lot of companies are alluding to today. And it also helps in some of the cost optimization, seat utilization, so many other things that we are bringing in. And what somebody spoke about, the blended cost, it really helps that.
Yeah, I'll have to come in. I think Geetha, I have to keep it very brief because I am told there are a couple of things to be done before we open the bottle.
Sure. Very quick one. I'm going to be slightly disruptive here. So today we are managing, we have events to bring people back, and they have the opportunity for staff engagement. And as we expand and, have talent in different parts of the country and globe, I would imagine with 5G rollout and metaverse kind of environments picking up, people should be getting that immersive environment wherever they are and still feel engaged. Food for thought.
No, absolutely brilliant. Yeah, that's a brilliant one. And don't we think it's a time to do a round of applause for all the people present here? I think it was fantastic to listen to a different perspective, challenge each other with the right context and the right approach and so on and so forth. And I think a lot of learning. I was making notes, and I can assure you all that the Shared Services Forum will create a paper on this as a knowledge article and come back and circulate and share with you all. This is a lot of inputs which we have received today. That is something which we are committed to, and we will ensure we adhere to as we progress. Thank you, each one of you, for spending the time and sharing your perspectives. I know we can go on for some more time to share our perspective and even learn from each other. I could see that a lot of people were making notes even to learn from each other, because we all, like Sunil, even you can talk about, you talked about it by saying, unstructured benchmark, right, knowing from each other. I think that's something which is very powerful and important, and we also should do that. I will take this opportunity to express my sincere gratitude to all the panelists here and all the leaders who have been in front of me, listening very patiently as well as passionately. And when the moment was there to contribute, I think what a perspective from each one of you. I think I must compliment you for the kind of perspectives you have added. A round of applause for you all. It's phenomenal. It's phenomenal. I would also like to thank all my virtual participants who are connected live right now on LinkedIn and Facebook and YouTube and so on and so forth, and all those who will be watching it later. I'm sure you will be having something to take away from this interaction. We will continue with the kind of interaction we are doing, and I also want to take a moment to thank all those who have worked behind to make it happen, be it our knowledge team from RvaluE team, be it event being supported by Quintes Global.